Lisa Martinez sat in the cold metal chair and watched the alien creatures around her make decisions about billions of lives. The Galactic Council chamber stretched out like a massive bowl with thousands of seats arranged in circles. Each seat held a different kind of being from across the galaxy. Some looked like giant insects with too many legs. Others were covered in scales or had tentacles where arms should be. A few glowed with their own light. Lisa had been coming to these meetings for 3 years now, and she still felt like she was sitting in a nightmare. Today was supposed to be different. Today the humans were asking for something simple. They wanted to help the Catherian refugees who had lost their homes when their star went bad. The Catherians looked almost human except for their blue skin and large black eyes. They had nowhere to go and no one to help them. The human colonies had already prepared empty planets where the refugees could live safely. All they needed was council approval to transport them there. Lisa looked down at her datapad and read through the proposal one more time. It was fair and reasonable. The humans would pay for everything. They would provide the ships and the supplies and the medical care. The council would not have to spend a single credit or lift a finger to help. All they had to do was say yes. She looked around the chamber and counted the votes in her head. The math was always the same. There were 47 different species in the council, and humans were just one vote. The other species usually voted together against anything humans suggested. It did not matter if the idea was good or bad. If humans wanted it, then the others would find a reason to say no. Ambassador Vexthara from the hegemony rose from her seat. The creature looked like a praying mantis that had grown to the size of a person. Her forearms moved in complex patterns. As she spoke, the translation device in Lisa's ear turned the clicking sounds into words she could understand. The human proposal is once again a waste of time and resources, Vexthara said. These Catherians are a failed species. Their star died because they were too primitive to prevent it. They could not save themselves, so why should we save them? The humans show their weakness by caring about such worthless beings. This is why humans will never be a major power in the galaxy. The chamber filled with sounds that the translation devices could not turn into words. Lisa heard clicking and chittering and buzzing and squealing. She knew these were sounds of agreement and laughter. The aliens found it funny that humans wanted to help refugees. Counselor Brethen from the Trade Federation stood up next. He looked like a walking tree with eyes scattered across his bark-like skin. The humans have proposed 15 different aid programs in the last year, he said. Each time they want to spend massive amounts of resources on species that cannot help themselves. This shows poor judgment and emotional thinking. The galaxy has no room for such weakness. More sounds of agreement echoed through the chamber. Lisa felt Captain Jake Morrison shift in the seat next to her. Jake had been a soldier for 20 years before becoming the human military representative to the council. His face stayed calm, but Lisa could see his hands forming fists on his lap. Dr. Amy Chun sat on Lisa's other side. She was the chief science advisor and the smartest person Lisa had ever met. Amy had developed new medical treatments that saved millions of lives across dozens of worlds. The aliens used her discoveries every day, but they still treated her like she was stupid because she was human. The vote will now begin, announced the council speaker. The speaker was an ancient being that looked like a floating brain inside a glass dome. No one knew what species it belonged to originally. It had been leading council meetings for over 1,000 years. One by one, the species announced their votes. The Crystalline Confederacy voted no. The Bio Collective voted no. The Stellar Dominion voted no. The pattern continued exactly as Lisa had expected. When it was over, the final count was 46 votes against and 1 vote in favor. The humans were alone as always. The proposal is rejected, the speaker announced. The council finds no merit in wasting resources on failed species. The Catherians can find their own solution to their problems. Lisa stood up slowly. She had done this same thing dozens of times before. She would make a polite statement about being disappointed but understanding the council's position. She would promise to bring better proposals in the future. She would smile and pretend that this was just politics as usual, but today felt different. Today she was tired of pretending that any of this mattered. She was tired of watching good people suffer while these creatures played games with their lives. She was tired of being treated like a child who did not understand how the real world worked. "Thank you for your time, counselors," Lisa said in a quiet voice that carried clearly through the chamber. "This concludes humanity's participation in these proceedings." She picked up her datapad and walked toward the exit. Jake and Amy followed without saying a word. The aliens in the chamber continued their conversations as if nothing important had happened. They did not seem to notice or care that the humans were leaving as they walked through the long corridors toward their ship. Lisa activated her secure communication device. She sent the same message to every human colony, every research station, every diplomatic post, and every military base in human space. The message was only 3 words long, but every human who received it would know exactly what it meant. "Operation Quiet Exit," she typed. Within minutes confirmations began arriving. From across the galaxy, colony administrators acknowledged the message. Ship captains changed course toward human space. Research teams began packing their equipment. Diplomatic staff started closing their offices. Medical personnel submitted resignation letters to alien hospitals. The humans had spent decades building relationships across the galaxy. They had become doctors and engineers and teachers and administrators on hundreds of different worlds. They had designed systems and solved problems and made life better for billions of beings who were not human. They had done all of this while being told they were weak and primitive and worthless. Now they were going home, all of them. Every single human in council space would be gone within 6 months. They would not fight or argue or make threats. They would simply pack their things and leave. The aliens could figure out how to run their galaxy without human help. Lisa reached her ship and looked back at the council building one last time. The massive structure rose into the sky like a monument to galactic cooperation. Inside, thousands of aliens were making decisions that would affect trillions of lives. They thought they were the masters of the universe. Soon they would learn what the galaxy looked like without humans to hold it together. Dr. Ben Parker stood in his laboratory on Centauri Prime and looked at the equipment he had spent 5 years setting up. The medical research facility was the most advanced trauma center in this sector of the galaxy. Human doctors and nurses worked alongside alien medical staff to treat injuries and diseases that would have been impossible to cure. Just a few decades ago, the aliens did not know that humans had developed most of the techniques they used every day. When a Vorthan soldier came in with severe burns, the alien doctors would use human-designed skin grafting procedures. When a crystalline being suffered from neural damage, they would apply human-created nerve regeneration therapy. The aliens thought these were just standard medical practices that had always existed. Ben walked through the halls and watched his human staff quietly packing their personal belongings. Dr. Susan Hayes was closing down the psychological counseling center she had built from nothing. The aliens had not understood the concept of mental health treatment until humans showed them how trauma could be healed with the right care and attention. Now there were counseling centers on 30 different worlds, all based on the methods Susan had developed. "The transport ships will arrive tomorrow morning," Ben told his staff during their final meeting. "Make sure all patient records are transferred to the alien medical teams. Complete any surgeries that cannot be delayed. Leave detailed instructions for ongoing treatments, but do not expect them to be followed correctly." Dr. Lisa Cooper raised her hand. She had been running the pediatric ward where young aliens from dozens of species received care. "What about the children who are still in critical condition?" she asked. "Some of them will die without proper treatment." Ben felt the weight of that question. The human medical staff had saved thousands of young lives over the years. They had developed new techniques for treating genetic disorders and birth defects that were common in alien species. Without human doctors, many alien children would not survive to adulthood. "We leave the instructions and hope for the best," Ben said quietly. We cannot force them to value what we do. Across the galaxy, similar conversations were happening in every facility where humans worked. Chief Engineer Kate Williams stood on the observation deck of the Nexus communication hub and watched her team begin the careful shutdown of systems they had spent decades building. The quantum communication network connected every major world. In Council space, messages that once took months to travel between distant stars now arrived in minutes, thanks to human engineering. Kate had designed the relay stations that made instant communication possible across thousands of light years. She had solved the quantum entanglement problems that alien scientists said were impossible to fix. She had written the software that translated different alien languages in real time during communications. Now she was teaching alien technicians how to maintain systems they could barely understand. The main quantum processor needs calibration every 72 hours, Kate explained to a group of hegemony engineers. If the entanglement fields drift beyond these parameters, the entire network will collapse. The emergency restart procedure is in Section 12 of the manual, but it requires intuitive problem solving that your species may find difficult. The alien engineers clicked their mandibles, and what Kate had learned was their way of showing annoyance. They did not like being told they might not understand something. They took detailed notes, but Kate could see in their compound eyes that they did not really grasp the concepts she was explaining. The humans had always approached engineering differently than other species. While aliens followed rigid procedures and refused to deviate from established protocols, humans would look at a problem and find creative solutions that no one had thought of before. They would combine technologies in new ways and make intuitive leaps that seemed obvious once someone explained them. Kate remembered the first time she had proposed using biological neural networks to enhance quantum processors. The alien scientists had called the idea impossible and disgusting. They could not imagine mixing organic and mechanical components. But Kate had grown up on a farm before becoming an engineer, and she understood that nature often had better solutions than artificial designs. The bio-enhanced processors were now the backbone of the Galactic Communication System colony. Administrator Steve Johnson coordinated the massive logistics operation from his office on New Terra. Spreadsheets covered his wall screens showing the location and status of every human settlement in Council space. There were over 300 colonies with populations ranging from a few thousand to several million people. Moving them all would be the largest migration in human history. The agricultural worlds will take longer to evacuate, Steve told his assistant Mary Clark. We need to finish the harvest cycles or the aliens will face food shortages within months. The industrial colonies can shut down faster, but we need to transfer the manufacturing processes to alien workers first. Steve pulled up a map of human territories beyond Council space. For 50 years, humans had been quietly exploring and terraforming worlds and regions the aliens considered worthless. These were planets with unusual atmospheric compositions or strange gravity fields that most species found uncomfortable. But humans were adaptable and had learned to thrive in environments that other species avoided. The new human worlds had cities and farms and factories that most of the galaxy did not know existed. They had universities and research centers and spaceports that rivaled anything in Council space. They had been preparing for this day, even though they had hoped it would never come. The colony ships are already moving, Mary reported. Captain, Frank Turner estimates we can complete the evacuation in 5 months if we maintain current schedules. The alien governments have not yet realized what is happening. Steve nodded and looked at the reports coming in from across the galaxy. Human doctors were leaving hospitals. Human engineers were shutting down power plants and water treatment facilities. Human teachers were closing schools. Human administrators were transferring government databases to alien officials who had never learned how the systems actually worked. The humans were not sabotaging anything or taking more than they had brought with them. They were simply removing themselves and their knowledge from a galaxy that had made it clear they were not wanted. Every contract was being fulfilled exactly as written. Every obligation was being met to the letter. But when the contracts expired, They would not be renewed. The aliens would wake up one morning and find that the humans were gone. Only then would they begin to understand what they had lost. The first system failure happened on a Tuesday morning 3 months after the humans left. Counselor HFY was reviewing trade reports when every screen in his office went dark. The quantum communication array that connected the outer rim territories to the central council worlds had stopped working completely. HFY called his technical staff immediately. Chief Technician Vorksahan arrived within minutes with his repair team. They were the best alien engineers in the Trade Federation, and they had always been able to fix any problem that arose with council technology. The quantum processors have entered a cascade failure state, Vorksahan reported after 6 hours of diagnostics. The entanglement fields are drifting beyond acceptable parameters. We have followed all standard repair protocols, but the system continues to degrade. What do the technical manuals say? HFY asked. The manuals were written by humans, Vorksahan replied. They reference procedures that require intuitive problem-solving and creative engineering approaches. Our technicians are trained to follow precise protocols. We do not understand how to make the intuitive leaps the humans describe. HFY felt a cold sensation in his stomach region. The communication blackout meant that 17 different worlds could not coordinate trade, shipments, or emergency services. Cargo ships were arriving at the wrong ports. Medical supplies were sitting in warehouses while hospitals ran out of basic medications. The carefully balanced interstellar economy that had operated smoothly for centuries was beginning to break down. Similar problems were appearing across the galaxy. On Vorthan Prime, the water treatment facilities had started producing contaminated water. The human-designed filtration systems required constant adjustments based on changing environmental conditions. The Vorthan technicians could follow the basic maintenance schedules, but they could not adapt the systems when unusual circumstances arose. Dr. Rathmara was the Vorthan Minister of Health, and she was facing the worst medical crisis in her planet's history. A simple respiratory infection had begun spreading through the population, but the alien medical staff could not contain it. The humans had developed quarantine procedures that treated disease outbreaks as both medical and social problems. They understood that fear and panic could spread faster than any virus, and they had created protocols that addressed both the physical and psychological aspects of epidemic response. The infection rate is increasing exponentially, Dr. Rathmara told the Planetary Council. We have isolated the infected individuals as specified in the medical protocols, but the disease continues to spread. The human procedures reference social intervention strategies that we do not comprehend. The Vorthan medical teams had excellent knowledge of biology and chemistry, but they approached diseases as purely technical problems. They could identify pathogens and develop treatments, but they could not understand why people would refuse medical care or hide symptoms from doctors. The humans had spent centuries learning how to work with scared and confused populations during health emergencies. Without human medical coordinators, the quarantine procedures fell apart within weeks. Infected individuals escaped from isolation facilities because no one had thought to provide psychological counseling or family communication services. Healthy people rioted in the streets because no one had organized public information campaigns. To reduce fear and misinformation, the economic situation was becoming desperate on dozens of worlds. Cargo ships that had once followed efficient routes designed by human logistics coordinators were now wandering through space trying to find their destinations. The shipping schedules that moved food and supplies across the galaxy had been optimized by human mathematicians who understood both the technical requirements of space travel and the practical needs of different species. Captain Vekvar commanded a massive cargo vessel that carried grain from agricultural worlds to urban centers. His ship had been making the same route for 10 years without any problems. But now the route planning computers were giving him contradictory instructions, and he could not figure out how to resolve the conflicts. The navigation system says we should arrive at Kepler Station in 6 days, Vekvar told his crew. But the cargo manifest says the grain will spoil in 4 days if we do not reach a refrigerated storage facility. The fuel calculations indicate we do not have enough energy to reach any refrigerated facility in 4 days. The human logistics coordinators had solved these types of problems automatically. They would reroute ships through different systems, or arrange for fuel transfers or coordinate with multiple facilities to ensure that perishable cargo reached its destination safely. The alien ship crews could follow predetermined routes, but they could not adapt to changing circumstances. Food shortages began appearing on highly populated worlds that had depended on regular cargo deliveries. The sophisticated distribution networks that prevented famines across dozens of worlds with different growing seasons and dietary needs were breaking down without human agricultural scientists to coordinate them. On the council floor, the first accusations began flying between different species. The Crystalline Confederacy blamed the Trade Federation for the shipping problems. The Bio Collective accused the Stellar Dominion of hoarding medical supplies. The Hegemony claimed that other species were sabotaging infrastructure to gain political advantages. None of them mentioned the humans who had left 3 months earlier. Pride prevented them from admitting that the primitive species they had mocked might have been essential to their civilization's functioning. They had convinced themselves that humans were weak and emotional and incapable of making important contributions to galactic society. Counselor Vexthara stood before the council and delivered a speech about the need for unity during difficult times. She blamed the current problems on solar flares and equipment aging and random system failures that could not have been prevented. She did not acknowledge that most of the failing systems had been designed and maintained by humans. These temporary difficulties will be resolved through proper alien engineering and logical thinking, Vexthara announced. We do not need emotional species to solve technical problems. The great civilizations of the galaxy will overcome these minor setbacks through superior intelligence and rational planning. But privately, Vexthara was receiving increasingly desperate reports from her own homeworld. The energy distribution network was failing and rolling blackouts were affecting major cities. The alien technicians insisted they were following all proper procedures, but the power grid continued to degrade. The human engineers who had designed the system were gone and they had taken their knowledge with them. 1 year after the humans left, the galaxy was falling apart. What had started as minor technical problems had grown into complete system breakdowns that threatened entire civilizations. The aliens were beginning to understand that they had lost more than just another species when the humans departed. The war between the Crystalline Confederacy and the Bio Collective started over a trade dispute that should have been easy to resolve. Both species needed resources that the other possessed in abundance. A simple exchange agreement would have benefited everyone involved. But without human diplomats to find creative solutions, the negotiations collapsed into accusations and threats. Commander Lisa Torres watched the conflict unfold from her monitoring station in human space. The new human territories were located far beyond the borders of council space in regions the aliens had dismissed as worthless, but the humans had built thriving colonies on these worlds and established their own communication networks to stay informed about galactic events. The Crystalline Fleet has surrounded 3 bio-collective worlds, Lisa reported to President Alan Foster during their weekly briefing. The bio-collective is threatening to release engineered plagues that will destroy crystalline settlements. Both sides are requesting military support from other council species. President Foster studied the tactical displays on his screen. The war was spreading as other species chose sides based on old grudges and political alliances. What had once been a peaceful galaxy was dividing into hostile camps that saw every disagreement as a threat to their survival. How many similar conflicts have erupted in the past 6 months? Foster asked. 17 separate wars involving 43 different species, Lisa replied. The Council's mediation services have completely broken down. The aliens are defaulting to violence when they cannot reach agreements through negotiation. The humans had spent centuries serving as neutral mediators between species that had fundamental differences in how they approached problems. Some aliens were naturally aggressive and saw compromise as weakness. Others were extremely cautious and avoided making any decisions that involved risk. A few species were completely logical and could not understand emotional motivations, human. Diplomats had learned to work with all these different personality types and find solutions that satisfied everyone's core needs. They would spend weeks learning about alien cultures and developing new approaches to each unique situation. The alien diplomats who replaced them only knew how to follow rigid protocols that assumed all species thought the same way. The food crisis had reached catastrophic levels on dozens of worlds. The agricultural coordination systems that prevented famines across different growing seasons and dietary requirements had completely collapsed. Planets that specialized in producing specific crops could not get their products to worlds that needed them. Dr. Rachel Lewis was reviewing the supply chain reports from her research facility in human space. She had been the chief xenobiologist for the Council before the Exodus, and she understood better than anyone how complex the galactic food web had become. Each species had evolved to eat different types of nutrients, and many could not survive on foods that other species considered normal. The Andorian colonies are facing starvation because they cannot digest the grain shipments being sent from hegemony worlds. Rachel told her research team, the biochemical conversion processes that made alien foods safe for different species were all developed by human agricultural scientists. The aliens are trying to feed everyone the same basic nutrients without understanding how different digestive systems work. The human agricultural programs had done more than just grow food. They had developed methods for converting proteins and vitamins from one form to another so that any species could benefit from any planet's agricultural output. They had created genetic modifications that made crops more nutritious and easier to digest. They had solved the fundamental problem of how to feed billions of different creatures with completely different biological needs. Without human oversight, the agricultural worlds were producing massive amounts of food that much of the galaxy could not eat. Ships full of grain were arriving at planets where the population would starve if they tried to consume it. Meanwhile, other worlds that could process the grain were receiving shipments of vegetables that would poison their entire population. The medical situation was becoming desperate across Council space. The hospitals and research facilities that had relied on human expertise were losing patients who should have survived routine treatments. Dr. Morris Chan was monitoring the medical reports from his new position as Director of Human Health Services. In exile, the trauma surgery success rates have dropped by 60% since we left, Morris reported to the Human Medical Council. The aliens are trying to follow our procedures, but they do not understand the underlying principles. They can memorize the steps, but they cannot adapt when complications arise. The human approach to medicine had always been different from alien practices. While other species focused on treating specific symptoms or diseases, humans looked at the whole patient and considered how physical, mental, and social factors all affected health outcomes. They had developed integrated treatment protocols that addressed multiple problems simultaneously. The alien medical staff could follow human-written procedures for simple cases, but they struggled with anything that required judgment or creativity. When a patient had multiple injuries or unusual complications, the alien doctors would become paralyzed by indecision because their training did not prepare them to handle situations that were not covered in the standard manuals. Emergency messages were beginning to arrive at human colonies from individual alien worlds. Unlike the official council, which still refused to acknowledge that anything was wrong, some planetary governments were starting to understand what they had lost when the humans departed. The messages ranged from formal requests for technical assistance to desperate pleas for human doctors and engineers to return and save their civilizations. President Foster read through the communications during his daily briefings and felt a mixture of sadness and vindication. The Vortham Planetary Council is offering full citizenship and political representation if we will send medical teams to help with their plague outbreak, Foster told his cabinet. The Kepler Mining Consortium is promising exclusive trade rights if we will restart their industrial systems. The Academic Federation wants us to return and resume our research programs. But the humans had moved beyond needing anything the aliens could offer. Their new colonies were prosperous and growing. Their research programs were advancing faster than ever, without the need to constantly justify their methods to alien oversight committees. They had built a new civilization based on cooperation and mutual respect rather than competition and domination. 2 years after humanity's quiet departure, the Galactic Council faced a choice that would determine the future of their civilization. They could swallow their pride and ask the humans to return, or they could watch everything they had built crumble into chaos and barbarism. The final breaking point came during what was supposed to be an emergency session to address the growing crisis. Councillor Vexthara arrived at the council chambers to find half the seats empty. Many species could no longer afford to send representatives because their economies had collapsed. Others were too busy fighting wars or dealing with internal rebellions to participate in galactic politics. The session began with reports of new disasters from across council space. The hegemony had lost 3 major industrial worlds to system failures. The Trade Federation was facing mass starvation as their food distribution networks continued to break down. The Stellar Dominion was dealing with refugee crises as entire populations fled from worlds where basic services no longer functioned. "We must find solutions to these problems immediately," announced the council speaker. The ancient being's voice carried desperation that had not been present during the centuries of peaceful governance. Our civilization cannot survive much longer without addressing these systemic failures. Councillor Brethen from the Trade Federation rose to speak, but his words were cut off by a loud buzzing sound that filled the chamber. The translation systems that allowed different species to communicate had begun malfunctioning. Without human linguists to maintain the complex software that converted alien languages in real time, the various species were reverting to their original forms of communication. The chamber descended into chaos as delegates tried to understand each other through gestures and primitive sound patterns. Some species began displaying threat behaviors when they could not make themselves understood. Others retreated to defensive postures and refused to interact with anyone. The careful diplomatic protocols that had maintained peace for centuries collapsed in a matter of minutes. Vexthara watched the breakdown with growing horror. Her own homeworld was facing civil unrest as infrastructure failures led to widespread suffering. The citizens were demanding to know why their government had driven away the species that had kept their society functioning smoothly. Similar protests were happening on worlds across the galaxy as populations realized that their leaders had made a terrible mistake. In the human territories, Ambassador Lisa Martinez was establishing new policies for dealing with the desperate requests that arrived daily from council worlds. The humans had prospered in their exile and built thriving communities based on cooperation and mutual support. They no longer needed anything the aliens could offer, but they were not cruel enough to ignore genuine suffering. Any world that wants human assistance must demonstrate genuine respect for human values, Lisa announced during a meeting with the Human Colonial Council. They must show that they understand the importance of protecting weaker species and fostering cooperation over competition. We will not return to a galaxy that sees us as servants rather than partners. Some alien worlds began making the necessary changes. The agricultural planet Ceres Prime abandoned its rigid caste system and established democratic institutions that gave equal rights to all inhabitants. The mining colonies in the Vega system restructured their economies to provide fair wages and safe working conditions for all workers regardless of species. These reformed worlds received immediate human assistance. Human doctors arrived to treat the sick and injured. Human engineers restored critical infrastructure. Human teachers established new educational programs that emphasized cooperation and problem-solving skills. The improvements were dramatic and immediate. Other worlds were too proud to change their fundamental approaches to governance and society. The hegemony continued to insist that strength came from domination and refused to consider that cooperation might be more effective. The Bio-Collective maintained their belief that only genetically superior species deserved to survive and thrive. These stubborn civilizations continued their decline into chaos and irrelevance. Their populations suffered while their leaders clung to outdated ideas about racial superiority and social hierarchy. Some experienced complete governmental collapse as citizens abandoned worlds where life had become impossible. The galaxy slowly reorganized itself around human-led coalitions of species that valued collaboration, innovation, and mutual support. The new alliances were based on shared principles rather than military power or economic advantage. Species that had once been enemies worked together on projects that benefited everyone involved. Dr. Ben Parker found himself treating patients from a dozen different species at the new medical center on Haven Colony. The facility had been built using resources contributed by multiple worlds and staffed by volunteers from various alien species who had learned to work using human medical principles. The recovery rates are amazing when different species share their knowledge, Ben told his mixed staff of human and alien doctors. The crystalline healers understand energy manipulation better than anyone. The Vorthon surgeons have incredible precision. The bio-collective researchers know more about genetics than we ever thought possible. When we combine our strengths instead of competing, we can solve problems that seemed impossible. The old Galactic Council still existed, but its power was broken. Most member species had either joined human-led coalitions or fallen into chaos and isolation. The few remaining Council worlds spent their time arguing about who was responsible for the crisis while their civilizations continued to decay. The real decisions about galactic affairs were now made in the human territories where representatives from dozens of species worked together on the principles that humans had always advocated. Civilization's strength came not from the dominance of the strong, but from the protection and elevation of all members. President Foster often reflected on how things had changed during his evening walks through New Terra's capital city. The streets were filled with beings from across the galaxy who had chosen to live under human leadership because they valued the safety and opportunity that came with cooperative societies. Humanity had indeed left the Council without a fight or farewell. In doing so, they had proven that sometimes the most devastating victory comes not from destroying enemies, but from simply removing yourself from their reach and letting them destroy themselves. The humans had built something better while the aliens who had mocked them struggled to maintain the civilization that human expertise had made possible. The galaxy was learning that true strength came from lifting others up rather than putting them down. The species that embraced this lesson thrived in the new order, while those that rejected it faded into historical footnotes.